Nous allons écouter la coordonnatrice de ANCEFA qui va présenter les conclusions du rapport sur le financement de l'éducation en Afrique. Un rapport que tout le monde attend. Nous aurons évidemment l'essentiel de ce rapport avec Solange, qui devait avoir 8 à 9 minutes, mais qui va essayer peut-être de le synthétiser en 5-6 minutes pour nous permettre de rattraper le temps perdu. Solange, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Avant de commencer, je voudrais encore une fois remercier son Excellence, Madame la Commissaire de l'Union africaine, pour sa sympathie et pour sa passion pour l'éducation. It is my great pleasure to present the findings of the Africa Education Financing Report, which we are launching today. Let me see if I can share my screen. Doing so. Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So then this report is, I will go very quick. This is the outline of my presentation. I just want to say briefly that education is a fundamental human right that will be protected and fulfilled. We are all convinced as education activists. And ANCEFA, as a member of the global education movement led by GCE, is advocating for free, publicly funded, quality, inclusive education for all. We believe that SDG 4 and CESA 2016-2025 cannot be achieved without adequate and sustainable financing of education. The report is a desk review of government budget, education national budget, and expenditures in 35 countries across Africa. This collaborative effort from ANCEFA and GCE built on previous work done in the lead up to the GPE replenishment in 2018. And we are again in a year of replenishment. Like the commissioner said, it will happen in July 2021. National Education Coalition members of ANCEFA collected budget and spending, national budget and education spending information with the support of ANCEFA. And this data collection was further analyzed by a consultant, which came up with the funding that I am presenting. The data was analyzed through the 4S framework, which is a framework done together by ActionAid, Education International, and GCE, looking at the size of the budget, the share allocated to the education sector, but also the scrutiny and the sensitivity. But for this report, they only look at the size and the share, including new issue arising around COVID-19 pandemic and debt issues. Our observations were that access to reliable data was a challenge in many countries, particularly in the side of the education expenditures. When comparing data collected, the source of data, when it's different, like for GP replenishment pledges and what countries are enacting in their budget, figures can be different. And this is a source of a difficulty when you are to compare what countries pledged to allocate to education and what they are actually doing. About the share and size of education budget. While the size of the budget have been increasing over the years, the share allocated to education has remained small. And it was surprising to see that only 11% of the 35 countries are spending over 20% of their national budget on education. More so, 34% of countries allocated less than 10% of their national budget to education. When we relate that to the great demand on education in our continent, it gives us a sad picture. The report also shows that there is a relationship between debt servicing and education budget allocation. Countries that are spending large amounts of money repaying external debt are allocating less money to education budget and other social sector. It means that debt servicing has prevented countries to allocate the much needed resources to education sector. 10 out of the 35 countries are spending a greater percentage of their budget to pay debt than to offer education to their citizens. COVID impact on education. The outbreak of COVID, like everyone says, the school closures and lockdown compounded the plight of those who were already marginalized. The girl child, children with disabilities, children in a conflict and fragile state, children victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence. Despite the great needs, education budgets are not adjusting proportionally to the needs brought about by COVID, especially in poorer countries. To keep the world children learning, countries have implemented remote education programs. Unfortunately, we know our countries that children will not have access to internet, personal computers. In some homes, there is no radio. So all these factors have amplifying the effect of existing inequality. While when school or reopen, there are many risks that some of the kids, some of the learners will never return to school. Our recommendations, we think, and we say that Africa government must deliver on the commitment they made to provide free quality public education for all. They need to deliver on the pledge they made toward that goal, be it at international, regional, and national forums. They need to maintain and increase education budget to get learning affected by COVID-19 back to school, especially girls and children with disability. States must deliver on commitment to domestic financing, allocating at least 4 to 6% of their GDP or 15 to 20% of public expenditures to education. They need to improve monitoring and financial planning and involve civil society, especially GC coalition members, in drawing up those education budgets. They need to prioritize education within COVID-19 response and recovery plan. Establish crisis and post-crisis response mechanism. We want to see more resilient education system. Ministry of Finance and Education should also appoint a government focal point working with civil society and increase their tax base in order to enable an increase in domestic resource for education. States must also examine new tax sources toward a minimum tax to GDP ratio of 20%. GCE and coalition believe that countries should develop ambitious strategies using fair and progressive taxes so that those who earn more, the companies that are making much profit, they pay their fair share of taxes. Donor countries must fulfill all commitments related to ODA, including the commitment to the target of 0.7% of gross national product for ODA to developing countries. We call the international community for urgent debt cancellation for the least developed countries and a new global commitment compact for creditors and debtors to require full transparency before agreeing future loans. As member of the Global Education Committee, we commit to provide sustained tracking of education pledges, hold government to account for their pledges, ensure and use all advocacy opportunities to fully engage our political leaders for key decision-making. We need at all levels to step up our effort to protect education budget. I thank you for your attention.
Merci. Merci beaucoup Solange. Merci pour cette présentation très claire, à la fois exhaustive et pragmatique, succincte. Merci pour toutes les recommandations qui ont été formulées par le rapport et que nous allons évidemment mieux approfondir. Merci pour la méthodologie qui nous a permis d'avoir un rapport basé sur des réalités terrain et des remontées d'informations avec le travail des coalitions nationales. Merci donc pour ce travail. Bravo Solange.